At the Grand Starlight Hotel, where wealth is worshipped like a religion and a man's value is measured by the shine on his shoes, a single mistake was about to rewrite everything. On an ordinary Tuesday, the arrogant manager believed he was protecting the hotel's standards when he humiliated an elderly farmer and sent him back into the street. Guests laughed, staff smirked, and the old man walked away in silence. But that silence was the sound of doom approaching, because the man they dismissed as a nobody was the very billionaire who had come to save the hotel from collapse. And in rejecting him, they didn't just turn away a guest, they detonated the future of the entire empire. The moment he stepped out those doors, the countdown to disaster had already begun. What defines a person's worth? Is it the shine on their shoes, the brand on their suit, or the weight of the wallet in their pocket? At the Grand Starlight Hotel, a gleaming monument to modern wealth, the answer seemed obvious. But on one particular Tuesday afternoon, the hotel's polished, arrogant manager was about to make a mistake of such epic proportions that it would shatter his world. A misjudgment born from looking at a man and seeing only his clothes. He had no idea that the humble farmer he was about to dismiss was the one person holding the keys to the hotel's very survival. The story begins with a contrast so stark it was almost cinematic. A dusty but lovingly maintained old Ford pickup truck, the kind that has seen decades of harvests and country roads, pulled up to the curb. It was dwarfed by the hotel's imposing glass and steel facade, a place that whispered of unimaginable wealth, of powerful business deals and fortunes built on stocks and cunning investments. From the truck stepped an elderly man. His face was a testament to a life lived under the sun and sky, etched with the fine lines of hard work and quiet resilience. He wore faded denim overalls over a simple flannel shirt, the uniform of the American heartland. In his hand, he carried a single worn leather satchel, its surface softened by years of use. As he pushed through the revolving glass doors, a wave of cold, conditioned air, heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and antiseptic polish, washed over him. It was as if the very atmosphere of the hotel was trying to reject the faint, honest smell of rich soil and open fields that clung to him like a second skin. Inside, the lobby was a cathedral of opulence. Sunlight streamed through massive windows, glinting off the polished marble floors and the gold accents on the furniture. The hushed, confident chatter of guests, men in tailored suits discussing their assets and women adorned with jewels that could fund a small town, faltered. One by one, heads turned. Eyes cold and appraising followed the old farmer as he made his way across the vast, echoing space. He moved with a slow, deliberate dignity, seemingly unfazed by the sudden silence and the weight of their collective gaze. He approached the long marble front desk and waited patiently. A young receptionist, her expression a carefully constructed mask of professional boredom, glanced up. Her eyes flickered over his worn clothes, and the corner of her mouth twitched into a barely concealed smirk. She exchanged a look with the hotel manager, a man named Arthur Vance, who was gliding across the lobby with the predatory grace of a shark. Vance was the physical embodiment of the hotel itself, sleek, expensive, and utterly devoid of warmth. His suit was perfect, his smile was practiced, and his eyes held a chilling emptiness. "May I help you?" Vance asked, his tone dripping with a condescension so thick it was suffocating. He didn't wait for an answer from the farmer, instead directing his attention to the receptionist. "Everything all right here, Chloe?" The farmer, ignoring the slight, spoke in a quiet, steady voice. "I have a reservation. The name is Samuel Miller." Vance's smile tightened. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He made a show of looking at his pristine computer monitor, though he didn't type a single key. "Miller, you say? I'm afraid there must be some mistake. We are fully booked with a private corporate event. There are no available rooms." I booked a suite, the farmer clarified gently. Weeks ago. It should be under that name. The manager finally looked at him directly, his gaze sweeping over the farmer's calloused hands and the faded fabric of his shirt. A look of pure contempt settled on his face. "Sir," he said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "let's be realistic. An establishment like the Grand Starlight, it's a particular environment. Perhaps you would be more comfortable at one of the more modest motels down the street. I can assure you, our clientele expects a certain standard." The insult hung in the air, sharp and public. The whispers around the lobby grew louder. The humiliation was a physical blow. A deep, profound sadness filled the old farmer's eyes, a flicker of pain that was there and then gone, replaced by a stoic acceptance. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue or protest. He simply held the manager's cold gaze for a long moment, a silent communication that Vance was too arrogant to understand. Then he gave a slow, deliberate nod. Without another word, Samuel Miller turned and walked back the way he came. The judgmental eyes of the wealthy guests followed him, their faces a mixture of pity and smug satisfaction. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind him with a soft, final thud, sealing him out. Inside, Arthur Vance straightened his tie, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He believed he had expertly protected his brand, defended the sanctity of his luxurious world from an unwelcome intruder. He was completely, blissfully unaware that he hadn't just turned away a guest. He had just rejected his savior, and in doing so, had sealed the fate of the Grand Starlight Hotel forever. The seeds of consequence had been sown, and the harvest was going to be devastating. Driving away from the city's glittering center, Samuel Miller felt the sting of the manager's words more sharply than the cold air conditioning of his old truck. Each polished skyscraper he passed seemed to mock him, reinforcing the feeling that he was an outsider, a ghost from a simpler time wandering through a world that had forgotten him. He wasn't angry, not in the way a younger man might be. Instead, a deep, weary sorrow settled in his bones. It was the same sorrow he'd felt since his wife, Eleanor, had passed. She had been his bridge to this modern world, his translator of its frantic pace and strange new values. Without her, he was adrift. He drove until the gleam of the city faded in his rearview mirror, replaced by the humble storefronts and quiet residential streets of the outskirts. There, tucked between a laundromat and a small diner, he saw a sign: the Bluebird Motel. Clean rooms, honest prices. It was a simple, unassuming place, but it looked welcoming. He pulled into the small parking lot. The woman behind the counter was in her late 60s, with kind eyes and a warm smile that seemed genuine. She looked up from her crossword puzzle as he entered. "Can I help you, dear?" she asked, her voice gentle. She didn't glance at his overalls with disdain or at his calloused hands with judgment. She simply saw a tired traveler in need of a room. "I'd like a room for a few nights," Samuel said, his voice still quiet. The woman, whose name tag read Martha, simply nodded and pushed a registration card toward him. As he filled it out, she put on a pot of coffee. "Long drive?" she asked conversationally. "Something like that," Samuel replied. "In town on business?" Martha probed gently. Sliding a steaming mug across the counter, Samuel took a sip, the warmth a welcome comfort. "No," he said, looking into the dark liquid. "Something personal. I'm here to remember someone." Martha's perceptive gaze softened. She saw the deep grief in his eyes, a pain that no fancy suit could hide and no worn-out clothes could diminish. "Well," she said softly, "you've come to a quiet place. You let me know if you need anything at all." In that small, simple act of kindness, Samuel felt more welcome than he ever could have in the cavernous, cold lobby of the Grand Starlight. Meanwhile, back in that very lobby, Arthur Vance was anything but calm. He paced his glass-walled office, the city skyline a panoramic backdrop to his rising panic. He loosened the knot of his silk tie, his heart hammering against his ribs. The Grand Starlight Hotel, for all its outward displays of wealth and success, was a sinking ship. Years of mismanagement preceding his tenure, coupled with a changing economy, had hollowed it out from the inside. The hotel's liabilities were staggering, its cash flow a mere trickle. It was bleeding money, and the parent corporation was ready to pull the plug. His entire career, his carefully cultivated image, was on the brink of collapse. Salvation had appeared like a miracle just 1 month prior. An anonymous benefactor, represented by a top-tier law firm, had emerged from nowhere. This mysterious individual had pledged a massive investment, a capital injection so significant it would not only save the hotel, but allow for a complete revitalization. This wasn't just a loan, it was a full buyout, a chance to rebuild the hotel's fortune. The benefactor's net worth was rumored to be astronomical, a vast estate built from shrewd business dealings and a diverse portfolio of assets. The deal was the talk of the financial world. Though no one knew the name behind the money, Vance had only one instruction from the law firm. The benefactor demanded absolute discretion. No press, no leaks, no fanfare. The final papers were set to be signed at the end of the week, and Vance was anxiously awaiting the arrival of the benefactor's legal representative. This investment was his lifeline. It was the only thing standing between him and professional ruin, the only thing preventing a ruthless conglomerate known for hostile takeovers and gutting companies from swooping in and buying the hotel's debt for pennies on the dollar. He checked his watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. The representative was due any day. He smoothed his tie, forcing the mask of calm, collected authority back onto his face. Everything was riding on this. He just needed to hold it together for a few more days, and then the wealth would flow, securing his position and the hotel's future. He had no idea that the quiet, dignified man he had so callously dismissed just an hour earlier was not just a farmer, but the very source of that incredible fortune he was so desperately counting on. A few days later, the pristine, controlled world Arthur Vance had built around himself began to fracture. The calm mask he wore for his guests and staff was starting to slip. Every chime of his email, every ring of his phone sent a jolt of anxiety through him. The benefactor's representative had not arrived. The law firm had gone silent. The parent corporation, however, was getting louder, their calls becoming more frequent and their tone more menacing. His entire future hinged on an investment from a ghost, a faceless entity whose immense wealth was his only hope. Then, on a grey Thursday morning, the email he had been both dreading and praying for finally arrived. It was not from the representative announcing their arrival, but from a senior partner at the law firm. The message was brutally concise, stripped of all pleasantries. "Dear Mr. Vance," it began, "due to unforeseen and deeply personal circumstances on our client's part, the final meeting to sign the acquisition papers has been postponed indefinitely. We have no further information at this time. We will be in touch if the situation changes." Indefinitely, the word echoed in the silent, opulent office. It was a death sentence. Vance read it once, then twice, his mind refusing to process the implications. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed its way up his throat. He slammed his fist on the mahogany desk, a sound that made his personal assistant jump in the adjoining room. This couldn't be happening. He had staked everything on this deal, his reputation, his career, the very survival of the hotel. He called the law firm, his voice a strained, desperate bark, but was met with a polite, impenetrable wall of client confidentiality. The faceless benefactor remained a mystery, their vast fortune suddenly inexplicably out of reach. His desperation curdled into a foul, tyrannical rage. He stalked the halls of the Grand Starlight like a caged animal, his critiques of the staff becoming vicious, his demands impossible. A bellhop who was a second too slow, a housekeeper who missed a single speck of dust, all felt the venom of his terror. He was a captain going down with his ship, and he was determined to take everyone with him. While Vance's world was imploding, Samuel Miller was quietly rebuilding his. Each day, he would leave the simple comfort of the Bluebird Motel and journey into the city, not as a tourist, but as a pilgrim. He walked the paths of a life lived 50 years ago, visiting the small park where he and Eleanor had shared a picnic on their honeymoon, the old cinema where they'd held hands in the dark, the little bookstore where she'd found a treasured first edition. He wasn't just visiting places, he was visiting memories. In his hands, he always carried a small, leather-bound journal. It was Eleanor's. Her elegant script filled the pages, a vibrant chronicle of their life together. Sitting on a bench in that same park, he would run his calloused thumb over the worn cover before opening it. He wasn't just reading words, he was hearing her voice, feeling her presence beside him. He read about their hopes, their struggles on the farm, and the quiet joy they found in a simple life. The journal was more than a keepsake. It was the blueprint of their love, the key to understanding the incredible legacy she had planned. One afternoon, seeking refuge from a sudden downpour, Samuel found himself in a small, struggling cafe called The Daily Grind. He ordered a black coffee and sat at a small table by the window, the journal open before him. The cafe was nearly empty, save for a young woman hunched over a laptop in the corner, a half-empty mug beside her. Her name was Sarah Jenkins, a freelance journalist hungry for a story that would finally get her noticed, a story that would let her trade ramen noodles for a real salary. She was sharp, observant, and her journalistic instincts were finely tuned. She had noticed the old farmer come in. There was something about him that drew her eye, a quiet dignity that seemed out of place in the frantic rush of the city. He wasn't looking at his phone or staring blankly into space. He was completely absorbed in the old book in his hands, a faint, sad smile occasionally touching his lips. He looked like a man communing with a ghost. Sarah's curiosity, the engine of her profession, kicked into high gear. In a city full of people desperate to be seen, here was a man who seemed to exist in a world all his own. Her reporter's intuition screamed that there was more to him than a pair of faded overalls and a sad smile. She didn't know it yet, but she was looking at the biggest story of her career. 200 miles away, in a sleek Chicago law office, a phone rang for the fourth time, unanswered. Clara Miller, a woman with her father's resilience and her mother's sharp intellect, stared at the screen, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "Dad," she murmured, her voice tight with worry. It wasn't like him to go silent. After her mother's passing, they had spoken every single day, a ritual of mutual comfort. Now, for 2 days, nothing but voicemail. She knew he had gone to the city for that personal matter he'd been so vague about, but his silence was a screaming alarm bell. Packing a small overnight bag and cancelling her appointments, she was in her car within the hour, the city skyline of Chicago receding as she headed toward the one her father was in. She found his old Ford pickup parked outside the Bluebird Motel, a place that looked a world away from the life her father had recently been able to afford. Her heart sank. She found him in his room, sitting in a worn armchair, staring out the window at nothing. He looked smaller, older, the quiet strength that had always defined him now shrouded in a heavy blanket of sorrow. He hugged her, a gesture that felt both desperate and distant, but he offered no explanation for his silence or his choice of lodging. He just said he was tired. That evening, the silence between them was thick with unspoken words. Clara wanted to press him, to ask what had happened, but she saw the profound hurt in his eyes and knew he wasn't ready to share it. Later that night, unable to sleep, Clara noticed her mother's leather-bound journal lying on the bedside table. Her father must have been reading it before she arrived. She picked it up, its familiar weight a small comfort in her hands. She needed to feel close to her mother, to hear her voice, even if only on the page. She opened it to the last entry, expecting to find reflections on her illness, words of farewell. Instead, she found a story of breathtaking hope, a final secret plan that her mother had orchestrated with love and boundless optimism. The elegant script detailed the last few months of Eleanor's life. She wrote about the unexpected sale of a large, unused portion of their farmland to a solar energy company. It wasn't just a sale, it was a windfall, a staggering fortune that had turned their simple life upside down. Suddenly they were no longer just farmers, they were multi-millionaires, with a net worth that financial advisors struggled to quantify. Eleanor described their shock, the endless meetings about investments, stocks, and managing their new assets. But the money, the immense capital, was never the point for her. It was a tool, a means to a final, beautiful end. Then came the passage that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. "The Grand Starlight," her mother had written. "It seems a lifetime ago that your father and I, two kids barely out of our teens, spent our first night there as husband and wife. We had nothing but each other and a pocket full of dreams. That hotel. It was the beginning of our entire world." Clara's eyes scanned the page, her heart pounding faster. Eleanor went on to describe how she had discovered, through their new financial team, that the hotel was on the brink of bankruptcy. She saw it as a sign, a chance to preserve the place where their legacy began. "It will be my last gift to him, to us," the journal read. "We will save it. Not with a grand announcement, but quietly. We'll use this new wealth, this unexpected inheritance of sunshine and soil, to buy the hotel outright. Sam will go, not as a guest, but as the silent benefactor, the new owner. He will walk into the place where our life started and ensure it stands for another 50 years. He can restore it, make it a place of warmth again, a monument not to money, but to our love." The journal fell from Clara's hands. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Her father's trip, his silence, the cheap motel, the profound sadness in his eyes. He hadn't just been visiting the city to remember her mother. He had been going to the Grand Starlight to fulfill her dying wish. He had arrived as its savior, the anonymous billionaire ready to close the deal, and they had turned him away. They had looked at his worn clothes, at his farmer's hands, and they had humiliated him, casting him out of the very place he had come to rescue. A cold, sharp fury, unlike anything she had ever felt, rose within her. It was a lawyer's righteous anger, but it was fueled by a daughter's love. They hadn't just insulted a farmer, they had desecrated a memory and trampled on her mother's final dream, and they had no idea who they had just crossed. The next morning, Clara Miller walked out of the Bluebird Motel with the cold, focused calm of a predator. The fury from the night before had not dissipated. It had crystallized into a diamond-hard purpose. She wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, her hair pulled back in a severe professional bun. She was no longer just Samuel's daughter. She was his legal counsel, his champion, his retribution. She got into her late-model sedan, a car that spoke of quiet success and competence, and drove towards the heart of the city, towards the Grand Starlight Hotel. Her mind was a whirlwind of legal statutes and precedents: the Civil Rights Act of 1964, state discrimination laws, punitive damages. This wasn't just about an insult. It was about a pattern of corporate arrogance, a systemic prejudice that saw a man's worth only in the cut of his clothes. The hotel's vast assets and the parent corporation's deep pockets would be the target. This would be a painful, public and very expensive lesson. As she pulled away, a figure in a nearby car sat up, her interest piqued. It was Sarah Jenkins, the freelance journalist. She had returned to the motel on a hunch, hoping to find the old man from the cafe. Instead, she saw this powerful-looking woman emerge from his room and drive off with an expression of unwavering determination. Sarah's instincts screamed at her. This was it. This was the story. Starting her own car, she decided to follow, keeping a safe distance. Clara strode into the lobby of the Grand Starlight like a storm front moving in. The atmosphere shifted, but this time it wasn't with disdain. It was with deference. The receptionist, Chloe, who had smirked at her father, now offered a bright, professional smile. The bellhops stood a little straighter. Clara didn't command attention with wealth, but with an unshakable aura of authority. "I need to see Arthur Vance," she said, her voice even and firm, leaving no room for negotiation. "Tell him Clara Miller is here to discuss a pending legal matter." The mention of legal action was a key that unlocked doors. Within minutes, she was being escorted to Vance's panoramic office. Sarah slipped into the lobby behind her, blending in with the guests. She watched the exchange at the desk, her heart pounding. A legal matter. This was bigger than she thought. She positioned herself in a plush armchair, with a view of Vance's glass-walled office, pretending to read a magazine, her phone's audio recorder discreetly activated in her pocket. Arthur Vance was not having a good day. The pressure from the parent corporation was becoming unbearable. The indefinite postponement of the investment felt more permanent with each passing hour. When his assistant announced Clara Miller, he saw it as an unwelcome distraction. He greeted her with a strained, impatient smile. "Ms. Miller, how can I help you?" Clara didn't take the offered seat. She stood, placing her leather briefcase on his desk with a soft click. "Mr. Vance, I'm here on behalf of my client Samuel Miller. Does that name ring a bell?" Vance's eyes narrowed slightly. He vaguely recalled the name from the reservation system, the one belonging to the old farmer. "He was a potential guest," Vance said dismissively. "There was a booking error." "There was no error," Clara stated, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "There was a clear and actionable act of discrimination. You publicly humiliated and refused service to my client based on his appearance. You judged him, you insulted him, and you threw him out." Vance almost laughed. The sheer audacity was stunning. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this hotel maintains a certain standard. Your client was clearly not a fit for our establishment." "I was protecting the experience for my actual guests." "The experience you're protecting is a lawsuit that will cost this hotel millions," Clara shot back, her professional calm unwavering. "We will be filing for damages, both compensatory and punitive. We will subpoena your employment records, your training manuals, and we will depose every employee who witnessed the event. I will personally make it my mission to expose the toxic, elitist culture you have fostered here to every major news outlet in this country." This time, Vance did laugh. It was a short, barking sound of disbelief and arrogance. He was a man on the edge of a cliff, and his ego wouldn't let him see it. "You're threatening me? A young lawyer with an old farmer for a client. You think you can touch me? You have no idea the kind of pressure I'm under, the kind of real business I'm dealing with. This hotel is in the middle of a massive acquisition, a deal involving a fortune so large you couldn't comprehend it. Your little nuisance lawsuit is a gnat on a windshield." He waved a dismissive hand towards the door. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have important matters to attend to. Get out of my office." It was his second catastrophic mistake. He had not only confirmed his prejudice, but had demonstrated a level of hubris that was breathtaking. Clara simply stared at him, her expression unreadable. She gave a small, slow nod, the same gesture her father had used, but where her father's nod held sadness, hers held a promise of ruin. She picked up her briefcase and walked out without another word. From her vantage point, Sarah Jenkins had seen it all through the glass. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw the manager's derisive laughter and the woman's icy departure. She deactivated the recorder and hurried out of the lobby, catching up with Clara on the sidewalk. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice earnest. "My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm a journalist. I saw what happened in there. I also saw your father at a cafe a few days ago. I think you have a story that needs to be told." Clara stopped and looked at the young journalist, seeing not an opportunist, but a potential ally. In that moment, an alliance was forged, one that would turn a private injustice into a public firestorm. Over a cup of coffee in the same small cafe where Sarah had first seen Samuel, the two women laid out their strategy. Clara, ever the lawyer, was cautious. She explained the legal angle, the strength of the discrimination case, but she held back the most explosive piece of information: her father's true identity as the would-be savior of the hotel. For now, he was simply the victim, an elderly man whose dignity had been assaulted. Sarah listened intently, her reporter's notebook filling with shorthand. She understood the need for discretion, but also saw the human element that would make the story resonate with thousands. This wasn't just a legal brief, it was a modern-day fable of pride and prejudice. Their first move was to establish a pattern of behavior. "A man like Vance doesn't just have one bad day," Clara reasoned. "This kind of arrogance is a habit. We need to find other people he's walked over." Sarah's mind immediately went to the Bluebird Motel. It was the one place that had offered Samuel kindness, a stark contrast to the Grand Starlight. It was a long shot, but it was a place to start. They found Martha tending to her small garden in front of the motel. When Clara introduced herself as Samuel's daughter and explained their purpose, Martha's warm expression hardened. She invited them into her small office behind the front desk, the scent of fresh coffee and lemon polish in the air. "Arthur Vance," she said, the name leaving a bitter taste. "I know him. Or rather, I know his type." She went on to tell a story that made Clara's blood run cold. 5 years earlier, Vance had approached her with an offer to buy her motel. The offer was insultingly low. When she refused, the harassment began. He sent lawyers who buried her in paperwork, claiming her property violated obscure zoning laws. He filed complaints with the city, trying to bleed her dry with legal fees and fines. "He wanted to tear this place down," Martha said, her voice trembling with remembered anger, "for a parking garage. He told me my little motel was an eyesore, that it was dragging down the property values for his precious hotel. He thought because I was an old woman running a small business, I'd just roll over." But Martha hadn't. She fought back, using her meager savings to hire a local lawyer, and eventually Vance had given up, moving on to other targets. Her story was the missing piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just a single act of snobbery, it was a predatory business practice. Vance didn't just look down on people without money, he actively tried to crush them. Meanwhile, Arthur Vance was on a frantic quest of his own. He had received a single, cryptic follow-up from the law firm, a small crumb of information meant to placate him. "Our client has a historic, personal connection to the hotel." The words electrified him. A connection. This was the key. He immediately ordered the hotel archives to be brought to his office. For days, he was surrounded by dusty ledgers and faded guest registers from the 70s and 80s. He was looking for a name, a titan of industry, a reclusive multi-millionario who might have stayed there in his youth. He scanned the lists for oil barons, tech moguls, real estate tycoons, anyone whose known fortune could support such a massive investment. He cross-referenced names with old articles about the stock market, looking for anyone who had built a vast portfolio of assets. He was searching for a name synonymous with wealth, a name that dripped with dollars and power. The irony was suffocating. The man he was looking for, the man whose quiet, unassuming life had culminated in a fortune that could buy and sell Vance 1,000 times over, was just a few miles away, sleeping in a simple room at the very motel Vance had tried to destroy. Fueled by Martha's testimony and Clara's legal precision, Sarah worked through the night. She wrote with a fiery passion, channeling her own frustrations with a system that so often rewarded the Vances of the world. She crafted an article that was both a compelling human interest story and a scathing indictment of corporate elitism. She detailed the anonymous account of an elderly man, a visitor from the American heartland, being publicly shamed and turned away. She then wove in Martha's story, presenting a clear pattern of predatory behavior designed to sanitize the neighborhood for the wealthy. She didn't name Samuel, Clara, or Martha, protecting them as anonymous sources, which only made the story more powerful, suggesting this could happen to anyone. She titled it, The Grand Starlight, a 5-star hotel with a 0-star heart. She sent it to a popular, aggressive online news outlet known for its viral exposés. They published it within an hour. The effect was immediate and explosive. The story rocketed across social media. It was shared tens of thousands of times, the comment sections overflowing with outrage. Former employees of the Grand Starlight came forward with their own horror stories about Vance's tyrannical management. Guests recounted instances of similar snobbery. The hotel's 5-star rating on travel sites began to hemorrhage points. The pristine reputation Vance had so carefully curated was cracking, threatening to shatter completely. The noise was too loud to ignore. In a sterile boardroom hundreds of miles away, a senior executive at the parent corporation slammed his laptop shut. Their stock was already fragile, and this kind of viral bad press was a potential catastrophe, especially with the investment deal hanging by a thread. He picked up the phone. Arthur Vance answered on the first ring, his voice strained. "You have 48 hours to fix this." The executive's voice boomed, cold and devoid of sympathy. "Make this story disappear, or you will disappear, and so will your hotel." The line went dead, leaving Vance standing in his opulent office, the silence ringing in his ears like a final damning verdict. Desperation is a powerful catalyst. For a man like Arthur Vance, it didn't lead to introspection or remorse. It led to delusion. The 48-hour ultimatum was a ticking bomb, and instead of trying to defuse it with honesty, he decided to build a bigger, shinier bomb of his own and hope the explosion would somehow save him. Pacing his office, the viral article burning on his screen, he rejected the very idea of an apology. Apologizing was for the weak. It was an admission of guilt. He, Arthur Vance, was never guilty. He was a victim of circumstance, of a world that didn't appreciate his vision. His mind, sharpened by years of corporate maneuvering, landed on a plan. It was audacious, arrogant, and utterly detached from reality. He would host a press conference. He wouldn't address the unfortunate misunderstanding with the farmer. He would rise above it. He would announce a bold new initiative, a fictitious community partnership to demonstrate the hotel's deep commitment to the city. He would pledge a portion of the hotel's non-existent profits to local charities. It was a classic misdirection, a public relations smokescreen designed to paint him not as an elitist villain, but as a benevolent community leader. He would bury the negative story under an avalanche of positive press. He spent the next 24 hours in a frenzy of activity, a general preparing for his last stand. He had the hotel's grand ballroom prepared, a podium set up before a backdrop of the Grand Starlight logo. He personally called reporters from every major local news outlet, his voice a smooth blend of urgency and excitement, promising a major announcement that would redefine corporate responsibility in the city. He was creating a stage, and he would be its star. He practiced his speech in front of his office mirror, his reflection staring back, handsome and confident. He almost believed the lie himself. This grand gesture, he thought, might even impress the mysterious benefactor, proving he was a proactive manager capable of handling a crisis. At the Bluebird Motel, Samuel and Clara watched the news of the upcoming press conference on the small television in his room. A local news anchor breathlessly reported on the surprise announcement from the embattled hotel. Clara looked at her father. His face was calm, his hands resting on his knees, but she saw the flicker of pain in his eyes. "He's not going to apologize," Samuel said quietly. "It wasn't a question." "No, Dad," Clara replied, her voice firm. "Men like him never do. They just build bigger stages to tell bigger lies." She reached over and took his hand, "Which is why we have to be there. This isn't just about him anymore. It's about Mum's wish. It's about showing him that a person's worth, their real capital, isn't measured in dollars or fancy suits. It's measured in character." Samuel looked down at his worn denim overalls, the very clothes that had caused his humiliation. For a moment, he hesitated. He was a man of the soil, of quiet spaces and honest work. The thought of stepping into a room full of flashing cameras and shouting reporters was terrifying. But then he thought of Eleanor, of her bright, hopeful face as she wrote in her journal about their dream. Her legacy was not one of fear. He squeezed his daughter's hand and gave her a firm nod. "All right," he said, his voice finding its old strength. "Let's go." The ballroom was packed. Cameras flashed, reporters jostled for position, their microphones held aloft like offerings. The air crackled with anticipation. Arthur Vance walked to the podium, basking in the attention. He tapped the microphone, the sound echoing through the hushed room, and flashed his most charming, insincere smile. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began, his voice resonating with practiced confidence. "There have been whispers and online rumors recently, and I'm here today to set the record straight and to announce a new chapter for the Grand Starlight Hotel, a chapter of giving back. That's why I am thrilled to announce the formation of the Starlight Community Fund, a multi-million-dollar investment in the future of our great city." He was in his element, spinning a web of corporate speak and empty promises. He spoke of partnerships and empowerment, of lifting up the less fortunate. He was painting a masterpiece of deception, and the press was captivated. It was at that exact moment that the grand double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. Heads turned. The reporters in the back moved aside, creating a path. First came Clara, her expression one of cold, unwavering resolve. And beside her, walking with a slow, deliberate dignity, was her father. Samuel Miller was dressed in the same simple flannel shirt and faded denim overalls. He carried no briefcase, no documents, only the quiet, unshakable weight of the truth. The cameras, one by one, pivoted away from the man on the stage. The flashes now illuminated the old farmer, his weathered face a stark contrast to the gilded opulence of the room. The murmuring died down, replaced by a thick, profound silence. At the podium, Arthur Vance faltered, his sentence about synergistic community outreach dying on his lips. His eyes followed the gaze of the crowd. He saw Clara first, and his face tightened with annoyance. Then he saw the man standing beside her. His smile froze, his blood ran cold. He stared, his mind struggling to connect the humble, elderly farmer he had cast out into the street with the figure of immense power and presence who now stood before him, commanding the attention of the entire room. In that instant, the floor fell out from under his world. He was looking at a ghost who had come to collect a debt he never knew he owed. Clara took a step forward, her heels clicking with sharp authority on the polished floor. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum waiting to be filled. Every camera, every pair of eyes was fixed on the unlikely pair who had just upended the carefully orchestrated event. She walked directly to the podium, her gaze locked on Arthur Vance. He flinched as if she had struck him, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. "Mr. Vance?" Clara began, her voice calm, clear, and amplified by the microphone he had just been using. It carried to every corner of the ballroom, a blade cutting through the tension. "You were just speaking of community and giving back. A noble sentiment, but I'm here to talk about a different kind of value, the kind that isn't listed on the stock market." She reached into her briefcase and placed a small, worn, leather-bound journal on the podium. "This belonged to my mother, Eleanor Miller," she said, her voice softening for a moment with a flicker of grief before hardening again. 50 years ago, she and my father, Samuel Miller, spent their honeymoon in this very hotel. They were young, with barely $2 to their name, but they were rich in a way you could never comprehend. Vance's face had gone from pale to ashen. He looked from the journal to Samuel, a silent, desperate plea in his eyes that went unanswered. "My mother passed away a few months ago," Clara continued, her voice steady. "But before she did, she made a plan. You see, my father recently sold a portion of his farmland, an unexpected sale that resulted in a significant fortune, a vast patrimonio that changed their lives overnight. My mother, in her final days, learned that this hotel, the place where her life with my father truly began, was facing financial ruin. And she decided to use their new wealth, their capital, to save it." She opened the journal, her finger tracing the elegant script. She read aloud, her voice ringing with the weight of her mother's words. "It will be my last gift to him, to us. We will save it. Sam will go, not as a guest, but as the silent benefactor, the new owner. He will walk into the place where our life started and ensure it stands for another 50 years. A monument not to money, but to our love." A collective gasp went through the room. The reporters scribbled furiously, their faces a mixture of shock and journalistic glee. This was a story beyond their wildest expectations. Clara closed the journal and placed a thick sheaf of legal documents beside it. "Mr. Vance, you spoke of a massive acquisition. You were waiting for an anonymous benefactor. You spent days digging through old records, looking for some multimillionario industrialist. You were looking in the wrong place." She paused, letting the weight of her next words land with the force of a physical blow. "My father, Samuel Miller, is that benefactor. These documents confirm that he was in the final stages of a full cash buyout of the Grand Starlight Hotel and its parent company's assets." She pushed the documents toward the edge of the podium. "However," she said, and the word hung in the air, sharp and final, "due to the inhospitable, cruel, and discriminatory treatment my father received from you personally, Mr. Vance, that investment is now permanently withdrawn. The offer is rescinded, effective immediately. You looked at the man who came to save you, and you threw him out because you didn't like his clothes." The crushing, irreversible, catastrophic scale of the mistake finally landed on Arthur Vance. It wasn't just a misjudgment, it was the single act that had destroyed everything. The fortune he had banked his career on, the river of dollars that was meant to secure his future, had been standing right in front of him, and he had spat in its face. A low, guttural sound escaped his lips as he stared at Samuel, who simply met his gaze with a quiet, profound sadness. It was already too late. Before the reporters could even shout their first questions, a man in a severe, dark suit who had been standing at the back of the room strode forward. It was the executive from the parent corporation. He walked directly to Vance, his face a thundercloud of fury. "Vance, you're fired," he said, his voice low but carrying in the stunned silence. Pack your things. Security will escort you out." The executive then turned to the press, his face grim. Effective immediately. The Grand Starlight Hotel is being sold to cover its outstanding liabilities. The purchase by the Omnicorp conglomerate will be finalized within days. He took a deep breath before delivering the final devastating blow. As a result of this acquisition and restructuring, all current employment contracts at this hotel are terminated. The entire staff will be let go. A wave of shock and despair rippled through the hotel staff, who had gathered at the edges of the room to watch the press conference. The receptionist, Chloe, who had smirked at Samuel, grew pale. The bellhops, the housekeepers, the cooks, their faces filled with genuine fear and disbelief. Their futures, their livelihoods were now ruined, all because of one man's blinding prejudice. But as Arthur Vance was led away, a broken man stripped of his pride and his position, Samuel Miller watched the scene unfold. His eyes weren't on the disgraced manager. They were on the faces of the workers. He saw the single mother from housekeeping, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. He saw the young bellhop, who looked no older than his own grandson, staring blankly ahead, his dreams of paying for college suddenly turning to dust. He saw the fear, the raw, unfiltered despair of good people caught in the fallout of one man's arrogance. This was not what Eleanor would have wanted. Her dream was to save a place of happy memories, not to destroy the lives of innocent people. His fight had been with the poison of prejudice, not with the heart of the hotel, its staff. He turned to Clara, his expression resolute, and whispered a few words in her ear. Clara's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with a profound sense of pride. She nodded, a new, even fiercer determination on her face. Just as the corporate executive was attempting to herd the frenzied reporters out of the ballroom, Clara stepped back to the podium. "One moment," she called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. "This press conference is not over." The executive turned, his face a mask of irritation. "I believe we're done here, Ms. Miller." "On the contrary," Clara said, her voice ringing with authority. "We're just getting started. My client, Samuel Miller, has a new announcement to make." She turned to her father, who took a slow, deliberate step forward. He didn't approach the podium. He simply stood before the crowd, his quiet presence more powerful than any shouted speech. "My father's previous offer was withdrawn due to the actions of Mr. Vance," Clara explained. "However, the parent corporation is still in possession of this asset, an asset they are now liquidating under duress. Therefore, on behalf of my client, I'm now presenting a new offer." She looked directly at the stunned executive. "Mr. Miller is prepared to purchase the Grand Starlight Hotel outright in cash. We will not only match the offer from the Omnicorp conglomerate, we will exceed it by 10%. The funds can be transferred within the hour." A shocked silence fell over the room. The executive from the parent corporation stared, speechless. Omnicorp's hostile takeover was a lowball offer designed to prey on their desperation. Samuel's offer wasn't just better, it was a lifeline thrown from the most unexpected of places. It was a clean, immediate solution that would save them from further public humiliation and financial ruin. The executive, a man who understood only numbers, saw the undeniable logic. The deal was made right there, in the middle of the ballroom, with a simple, stunned nod. Samuel Miller, the farmer they had thrown out, was now the sole owner of the Grand Starlight Hotel. His first act was swift and decisive. Through Clara, he announced that the sale to the conglomerate was nullified. His second announcement brought a wave of gasps and then tears of relief from the staff. "All termination notices are hereby rescinded," Clara declared. "Every employee of this hotel is invited to keep their position. In fact, you are all receiving an immediate 15% raise in salary." But he wasn't finished. "There will be a change in management," Clara continued. The new general manager of the Grand Starlight will be a woman who has served this hotel with compassion and integrity for over 20 years. Please congratulate Maria Garcia." She gestured to the head of housekeeping, who stood frozen in disbelief, tears of shock and gratitude flooding her eyes as her fellow staff members erupted in applause. "Furthermore," Clara said, a smile finally breaking through her professional demeanor, "Mr. Miller is pleased to announce a new partnership. The position of Director of Guest Experience will be filled by another local business owner who understands the true meaning of hospitality. Please welcome Mrs. Martha Peterson of the Bluebird Motel." Martha, who had come to support Samuel, stood near the back, her hand over her heart, a look of pure astonishment on her face. Finally, Samuel himself spoke, his voice quiet but firm, carrying a weight that no microphone was needed to amplify. "My wife, Eleanor, loved this place," he said, looking around the gilded room. "She wanted it to be a monument to our love. So, the finest suite in this hotel will now be renamed the Eleanor Suite. And this hotel will no longer be a place that judges people by their clothes or their bank accounts. It will be a place of warmth, a place of dignity, a place of welcome for all. That will be her true legacy, and it will be our promise to you." The victory was bittersweet, born from a place of deep personal pain. Samuel Miller never wanted to be a hotelier. He was a man of the earth. But by accepting this new role, he was honoring his wife's memory in the truest way possible, not just by saving the building where their story began, but by transforming its soul. He had turned a symbol of cold, exclusive wealth into a testament to the enduring power of character, kindness, and a quiet, old-fashioned honor. The Grand Starlight was reborn, its future built not on a foundation of dollars, but on the bedrock of a farmer's values. What do you think of this story? It shows that a person's true worth is never on the surface. If you were moved by Samuel's journey, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe for more stories that matter, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in his situation? We'd love to hear from you.